to City Club Missoula's August Forum, Lessons from the Classroom, Education and Safety in Missoula Schools During COVID 2.0. I'm Julie Maloney, and I have the privilege of serving on the City Club Missoula's Board of Directors, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here virtually with us today. City Club's mission is to bring people together to inform and inspire them on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when we often discuss very controversial issues. Before I introduce our moderator, we have some thank yous. Thanks much to the University of Montana for making this virtual forum happen. Also, thanks to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. You can also find videos of past City Club Missoula forums by clicking the video button on our website, cityclubmissoula.com. Thanks to our sponsors, particularly those at the executive level. In addition to the university, they are Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. We would also like to highlight some of our other sponsors every month. So today we want to recognize Boone Carlberg, Glacier Country, Montana, and Providence St. Patrick Hospital. We're grateful to our very diverse sponsors, and we invite you to join them by going to our website. And of course, thanks to our board of directors and our administrator, Eric Leggold. City Club Missoula would also like to acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, some of whom are present with us today at our forum. Today, we honor the path they have always shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. Today's panel will be moderated by Dr. Adrea Lawrence. Dr. Lawrence is the Dean of the Phyllis J. Washington College of Education at the University of Montana. Prior to joining the UM faculty, Dr. Lawrence was a tenured professor at American University in Washington, D.C. She has a PhD from Indiana University and an MA and a BA from the University of Colorado. Before beginning her PhD in educational leadership and policy studies, she was a high school social studies teacher in the Denver metro area. Dr. Lawrence is an education historian whose published work has focused on American Indian histories and the corresponding education histories. She loves doing research that involves uncovering the complexities of how people make sense of their world, learn about it, and care for themselves and each other in it. Adrea enjoys spending time with her husband, who happens to be our current chair of the City Club Missoula, her 2 kids, parents, and greyhound dog. She will introduce our panel, and I will see you at the break around 12:15. Once the panelists have finished their presentations, then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Over to you, Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you so much, Julie. I very much appreciate that. I am delighted to be here today with my colleagues who serve as school administrators in the Missoula Valley. This has been nothing short of Groundhog Day. Again, at least that's what it feels like to me. I'm curious to find out if it feels the same way to you. So I am very pleased to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Doug Reisig is the superintendent of Hellgate Elementary, Department of Education recognized Blue Ribbon School District here in Missoula, and it is the largest Montana independent school district. Dr. Reisig has been the Hellgate Elementary School District Superintendent for the past 22 years. Although Dr. Reisig has been involved in Montana education for the last 46 years, with the last 34 years spent in superintendent positions at St. Ignatius, Troy, Anaconda, and Hellgate Elementary. Dr. Reisig received his BS degree and MED degrees from the University of Montana and his EDD in educational leadership from Montana State University. Dr. Reisig represents the Montana Office of Public Instruction on the executive board of the Montana High School Association, as well as represents the School Administrators of Montana organization on the executive board of the Montana Unified School Trust. In 2010, he was awarded the G.V. Erickson Award for notable service and dedication to education. The G.V. Erickson Award is the highest award the School Administrators of Montana organization can give to a Montana school administrator. Welcome, Dr. Reisig. Barb Droessler is the current principal of Target Range School in Missoula. She has been in this position for the last 10 years. Prior to this, she was a kindergarten teacher in Missoula County Public Schools and at Target Range School. Barb was born and raised in Missoula. She received her undergraduate degrees from the University of Montana and her principal superintendent licensure from Montana State University. She is married to Damian Droessler, who is the 2-3 principal at Hellgate Elementary, and together they have 3 sons. Welcome, Barb. Dr. Rob Watson. In July 2019, Dr. Watson was selected to serve as the superintendent of Missoula County Public Schools, a role that he held for Bozeman Public Schools for 7 years. Other leadership experience has included the principal of Bozeman High School from 2009 to 2012, and middle and high school principalships in Missoula County Public Schools between 2001 and 2009. Rob began his education career as a math and science teacher in Anchorage, Alaska. Rob holds a bachelor's degree in secondary education from Montana State University, a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Alaska, and received his doctorate degree in educational leadership from the University of Montana in 2009. In 2016, Rob was recognized by the School Administrators of Montana with the G.V. Erickson Award, the highest recognition given to a school administrator for notable service and dedication. In 2018, Rob was named as the Superintendent of the Year by his superintendent colleagues from around Montana. Rob believes in the power of education to change lives, a fact that motivates him each day toward a goal of helping all children experience success. Welcome, everyone. So I believe we will be beginning with Dr. Reisig's brief summary and presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me and Hellgate Elementary to be a partner and a member of this session today. It is an interesting deja vu time for us in education. It does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day all over again. We were so hopeful at Hellgate Elementary, as I'm sure all the other schools were, that maybe the Alpha variant of COVID was behind us and that this year could be more normal for our kids and our staff than what last year was. And I want to congratulate both Rob and Barb and their school districts on the work they did last year, trying to keep schools open and keep the education process moving forward for kids. Last year, we were able to keep our school open for 5 days a week, every week of the school year. It wasn't done by accident, of course. We had strong mitigation strategies in place, and our administrators, our staff, our parents, and more importantly, our kids did a wonderful job in trying to follow those mitigation strategies in order to keep the COVID virus as far away from the school as possible to allow us to continue to have school for our kids. Again, like I said, when we were hopeful for the start of this year that we wouldn't have to go back to some of the mitigation strategies that we now have back in place, but as the number of cases with the Delta variant have risen in our community over the course of the summer, we had to go back to implementing many of those mitigation strategies once again. It is important to note that our kids did experience some educational retrenchment from March of 2020 until the start of the 2020-2021 school year. And Julie, if you could just put the slide from Hellgate Elementary up on the screen, I would appreciate it, just to kind of give an overview as to how important it is for our kids to stay in school. We at Hellgate Elementary give the NWEA measurement of academic progress assessments to our kids. We give it 3 times a year to our kids at the school. And this is, for example, 3rd grade from last year. You can see where those kids started, for example, in math in the fall of 2020, after having been out of school since March, even though we were doing the virtual learning and no in-person learning. there was a significant drop off historically that we see over the last 3 years. Those kids last fall were really behind where their counterparts were in the previous years. But as we looked at what their scores were in the winter and then what their scores were at the end of last year, the amount of growth was substantial. And that was because of the in-person learning that we were able to provide for those kids and to have those kids work with their teachers on campus. And we'll see the same pattern if we go to the third grade language arts reading. You can see where those kids came in last fall. They were behind historically their counterparts, obviously other kids, but their counterparts from the previous years. And then the growth that went on through the course of the year, getting them to where they were at least comparable to where their counterparts were over the last 3 years and well above where their test scores indicated they should be in the spring. And we see the same thing with our fourth graders. And those are only the 2 grade levels that I selected just to see, because the third grade, they're the upper grade in our building 1, and the fourth grade, they're the lower grade in our building 3. And you can see in math, those fourth grade kids, again, when they came to us after having been out of school in person and in the virtual learning, were a little behind, but by the end of the year, they had made significant progress. And that's a credit to our teachers and our administrators and our parents, as well as our kids. And then the last slide, Julie, is just the reading. And you see the same pattern again, the growth that took place because our kids were able to be in school. And that is why in school is so important, and for schools to do whatever they have to do to try to keep kids in the buildings, in school, in an in-person learning environment, because there is really, in my opinion, no substitute for that human interaction that our kids, especially our little kids, get by being with their teachers in a face-to-face environment. And so the mitigation strategies that we have in place, and again, we'll probably talk about some of those today. Some may be controversial, some may be not so controversial, but they're all put in order to try to provide a forum for our kids to stay in school and for us not to be able, not to have to shut down. And again, for us, it's keep our kids safe, keep our teachers safe, because I simply don't have the substitute base to replace all of our teachers if, in fact, they had to leave because of actually contracting COVID or being a close contact. So with that, Adrea, I'll move off, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Many thanks, Doug. That was very helpful. Barb, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm muting a little bit. If I were to take a slide and show you exactly our data points, our school takes the NWEA test similar to Hellgate Elementary. Our student achievement mirrors Hellgate's almost exactly. Students struggled in the spring of 2020, and mainly because we had to turn everything on a dime. You know, 1 minute we were in school, then we were on spring break, and then we were in shelter in place. And so we didn't exactly get a real great chance to put everything together, but I'm delighted with how well everybody did. And I think that data could show an even greater decrease. Today, I'm just excited to be here to talk about school. I love talking about school. I love talking with Doug and Rob about school. And I'm just so excited to have an audience that wants to learn more about what's going on, COVID related or not COVID related. Education is powerful, and we have wonderful public schools in Missoula. And so it's awesome to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more, and that you want to hear from us. And so I look forward to the questions that might come up and just the opportunity to visit with everyone today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Barb. I appreciate that. Rob, what have you learned in MCPS?
Can everyone see that okay? So I don't have a whole lot more to share. I thought I would share some of our district data as well as talk a little bit about what this school year looks like. Really appreciate the opportunity. As both Barb and Doug said, I mean, we don't often get a chance to talk about these really important topics. So thank you for the chance just to share a few things. At the end of the school year last year, one of the things I did was I looked at our what I call our school associated positive cases. Now keep in mind, these are not positive cases that kids contracted in school. These are all the cases throughout the school year where a student may have contracted outside of school. In fact, that's what most of our evidence showed, was that most of the transmission was happening outside of school. But what I did is I pulled together all the student positive cases and all the staff positive cases that we tracked throughout the school year. And one thing you'll note is that I compared it with the other 7 or 8 large communities in our state. And of course, there's lots of differences, right? We all know that Missoula County had different data than other counties. And so we're really a reflection of what happened in the county. But this was at the end of the school year. We probably had about 400 or some odd cases associated with either students or staff. And when I took the percentage of the overall population of our students, it was 3.8% of our students last year and 9.25% of our staff. But those are really difficult numbers unless you compare them with what else is going on in the state. And overall, I think we did pretty well in Missoula County. I think it's not just, doesn't just speak to our school district, it speaks to the entire county and what some of the mitigation strategies were in the county. I think all of the districts in Missoula did really well in terms of keeping cases low. But when you throw out a number like 400 students or staff members, it sounds like a lot until you put it in perspective with how many students and staff that we actually have in the district. So that was encouraging to see how we fared compared to the other communities in our state. Similar to Doug and Barb, we also give an assessment. This one is a assessment that's given across the country to tens of thousands of students. That's a reading assessment. We give it in the fall, winter, and the spring. I actually pulled a couple of really interesting data points that I thought were somewhat remarkable. So the graph on the left there, the bars on the left show you January of 2020, 3rd grade reading. What you're looking at is the light blue is the percentage of students that scored above benchmark. The dark blue is the percentage of students that scored below benchmark in their 3rd grade reading assessment in the winter. 3rd grade is really important because it's a critical year where students really start to hone their reading skills, and it becomes a really good marker for future success. What's interesting to note, and now look at January of 2020, that's pre-COVID, so that's before the lockdown. You'll see that about 26% of our 3rd graders are below benchmark. That might seem a little shocking to folks that have never looked at this data before, but I can share with you that that's pretty typical from what we see during a 3rd grade year in our district. And in fact, not just in our district, many districts around the state have that a percentage of kids that are in 3rd grade that are struggling with reading. And so that's a totally different conversation, and one that I think we should all have with our community about 3rd grade reading percentages. But the reason I wanted to show you this graph is if you look at January of 2021, which the following year, the percentages are not that much different. And so I share that with you because I know there was a lot of concerns about what happened or what didn't happen with all the COVID mitigation strategies and with the shutdown. I think we too saw some drop off in terms of performance, but by winter of January of last year, our kids were back on track. And that's what I think is important to note on this particular graph. Again, 25% not proficient is a concern for all of us. And that's a typical year in, year out percentage that we're going to have to continue to talk about. But I did want to share that with you. 5th grade, pretty similar. Here's 5th grade. You'll notice January of 2020 and January of 2021, the percentage of non-proficient kids is pretty similar. What I think I learned from this graph is, again, as we came back out of the shutdown and went back to school, even though our first part of our school year, we were in a hybrid model, kids still recaptured many of the skills that we were fearful that they might have lost. The reason I like to use this assessment is because it can be done at home. In fact, we had a lot of kids that were in remote learning last fall. They didn't return to school, but they were in our remote learning program. and they still were able to do the assessment at home. So we were able to capture their scores in this data. The last thing I would share is just some information about what's happening this year. As Doug pointed out, we all hope to have a little bit more normal school this year. And I think for Missoula County Public Schools, I think our day is a little bit more normal as to what it used to be. But we do have several mitigation strategies in place still, including face coverings and some other mitigation strategies. But one thing that happened this year is we returned to every day, every student, longer school days. We had a shortened school day last year to help with bus, with staggering of our buses, but we're back to a longer school day. More traditional routines. Last year we were doing lunch in the classroom, which had its positives and negatives for our students and our staff. So we're back to more traditional routines, trying to get kids outside as much as possible and as quickly as possible, not spending too much time in the lunchroom. Last year we did electives in the classroom. So that was pretty non-traditional for music and library because kids didn't have a chance to go to those teaching environments. And this year we're doing those back in those teaching environments. So I think that's effective. School activities were very limited last year for us. We maintained school activities as much as we could at high school, after school activities, but we didn't have anything else for the K-8 schools, and we've returned some more of those. More school events. We didn't have open houses last year. This year we're doing open houses with quite a bit of mitigation strategies and outdoor activities. Parent volunteers didn't have a whole lot of extra adults in the school last year. This year we're trying to figure out how that works, bringing those volunteers back. And then I think the big thing that sort of has not been touched on, but what we're doing to recover from what we know to be are the effects of COVID, both educationally and social emotional health. And so we've added some very specific academic, and I know Barb and Doug have done this as well, but we've added some very specific academic and social emotional support for our schools, some things we've never had before, some staff that we've never had before, in order to help not only our schools, but our families and our kids recover. So we've moved what I called last year was sort of our COVID response. And this year we've moved into our COVID recovery plan, and lots of things we're doing in the schools to help support that, both academically in terms of getting kids caught up, but also social emotional support. So I think I'm going to stop there though, and just turn it back over to the moderators. Thank you for letting me share a little piece of data.
Thanks so much, Rob. So we already have one question that a person has added to the Q&A segment. So Christine Johnson asks, what is the breakdown of MCPS in-school reading versus at the online academy?
That is a really great question. We have that data. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can tell you, I think this will answer the question more in general terms. What we noted for the kids that were in the online academy last year is, and I don't think this will be a huge surprise to anyone, but the kids that did choose to join the online academy last year had a lot more supports at home in terms of parents that were able to maybe work from home and help them at home. And so what I think would likely see in the data is that the kids that were in the online academy actually performed a little bit better on the reading scores. And I would attribute that to a couple of things. Those reading scores are very much impacted with, lots of other factors, in terms of how much support kids have at home, how early they've, practiced some of those reading skills. So there's lots of mitigating factors that go into those reading scores. But I think the main thing to note is that the kids that participated in the online academy last year were generally from those households that had parent support at home, where parents could work from home. And so I think that kind of skews the data just a little bit.
Thank you for that, Rob. So for those of you who would like to ask questions, please go ahead and pose that using the Q&A tab on the bottom of your Zoom window. You should be able to type in a question there and it'll pop up so we can ask those. As people are thinking about the practices that are in place and in the new additions that you've run. I'm wondering if you might describe what some of those social emotional learning supports, academic supports look like across your 3 districts. And Doug, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, Adrea, that is a great question. And getting back to what Rob was saying about the social emotional supports, we've hired extra mental health people for this year on staff. We have hired extra teachers on staff to try to break down our class sizes even smaller so that we can have more individualized attention with children. Our Oveus bullying prevention program that we have district-wide is dedicated this year to those social emotional support activities to try to make sure that our kids feel that, as we always say here at Hellgate Elementary, it's like a one-stop shop. You start here as a kindergartner, you stay on our campus through the 8th grade. In fact, you could start as a pre-K student. And so we want our kids to feel like they have a home here and that they have a place of safety and security. And we're working very, very hard to make sure that we have that, not only from the academic standpoint, but also from the social emotional standpoint with our mental health people and in our partnerships that we have with Western Montana Mental Health. From an academic standpoint, again, we've dedicated large portions of our federal dollars that we've gotten in this year to hiring extra staff personnel in our lower grades primarily to try to keep those class sizes small so that we can develop more of that personalized education approach for those kids. And I think that's working out very well for us. We do have a distance learning component here, just as we had last year. And again, when we started the last school year, we had 250 kids that opted for the distance learning. Right now, we have 35 kids that have opted for the distance learning. So most of our kids have come back on campus and want to be on campus. And so I think those things are positives for us. It's positive in terms of, as Rob mentioned, the extracurricular activities. We're back to running pretty much a full extracurricular activity program for our kids so that they understand that we want them in the classroom, we want them to do the academic part, but we know that a large part of their total development in a school setting is their ability to participate in extracurricular activities. So I think we have a pretty good plan in place. I think it's working pretty well for us. And we're just going to try to keep it going for the rest of the school year.
Thank you, Doug. Barb, what about you?
So in terms of academic supports, we kind of took a different dive into it this summer and allowed our teachers to propose various summer camp options or learning classes essentially for kids. And so they designed them. One of them, for example, was called How to Start a Math Fight. And so they arranged the classes and proposed it. And if it seemed to fit, we added it. And so we had a pretty healthy summer opportunity for all kids. We also included we did not get to participate in athletics last year. And so we added some different sports and activities that the kids, jazz band, volleyball, some of those things that bring out that social aspect as well, like Dr. Reisig was saying. So in the month of June and in the month of August, students were able to participate in that, and teachers as well, which I noticed somebody was asking about how we take care of teachers. And one of those things is we honor them for their time. And so if they're the ones that are going to be creating and putting on these classes, they're getting paid accordingly, which is big when you're an educator, right? If you can get paid for the extras, that's fabulous. And that helps them tremendously if they are a new teacher and might have to get a summer job anyways. They'd love to work at the school. And then because we're on a smaller scale at our school, we're similar. We have kids from pre-K through 8th grade, but we're not as big. And so we don't have the luxury of hiring as many folks. So we really have to partner with outside groups. So we do have a comprehensive mental health team from AltaCare, but we also started a partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and in Big Sky High School, and we're trying to get students to serve as mentors to our students so that they have a buddy, and it all happens on campus. So we can still monitor that very closely, but just getting them connections and being around others and supporting each other. So we really rely heavily on all those things that are available to us through the Missoula community. And then fortunately, we were able to have 2 counselors, which is a big deal for target range. So we have an elementary counselor and a middle school counselor, which sometimes we aren't able to get that. So that's great. And then together, we're all working on a school-wide social emotional learning program that is done throughout every classroom, not just when the counselor is available to work with kids. So, I think we found through all of this that we are strong and mighty, but we do have some weak links. And so we've really put the onus on trying to fix some of those things, not because we don't want to do it now, but we have to find things that are sustainable for our small little district. And as much as we'd love to hire more people and things like that, they would only be with us for a year. And then what would we do for those kids? So we're really looking outside and trying to be creative and talking to everyone we can to come up with ideas to support our kids and our teachers.
Thank you, Barb. I appreciate that. Rob, what about you all?
Yeah, so I think I won't add too much, just a couple of points that, when you talk about academic or social emotional intervention, it's really varied. And I think probably the best way to understand this is that our schools are really kind of a microcosm of our communities. And what happens is that you've got some kids that come into school that need a lot more intervention, and then other kids that just need more general universal intervention. And so, Barb touched on a school-wide social emotional learning program. I think that's healthy for everybody. And especially coming out of a pandemic, I think it's really healthy for our students. So some of our students will receive, that sort of support at the school level, where other students are going to need a lot more focused intervention. And so the extra staff we have in place will be able to help us develop those school-wide systems, as well as intervention strategies that are specific to students that just need extra help, both academically and social emotional support. And to the point of extra funds, I think all of us, and Barb mentioned this, I think all of us are worried about sustainability. We do have extra funds this year to hire some of these positions, but it won't be around forever. And so I think it is really, really smart to consider what sorts of things can we build into the system that could be sustainable in the future versus what things do we need, immediately help with right now. And so, we're using a pretty big chunk of our COVID money this year, because we know that this year is probably going to be more difficult than the subsequent years, maybe in terms of academic and social emotional support. So you'll see, and at least in our plan for our budget, it's a little bit more heavy spend in the first year, and then the second and the third year is a little lighter in terms of expenditures. But we'll be asking that same question. Some of these wonderful programs that we're putting in place, how do we sustain them after the COVID money goes away?
Thank you for that, Rob. And you've actually addressed the next question, at least from the MCPS side. So Connie Keogh asks, please address how federal COVID funds are helping the districts and any budget concerns that you foresee. So thank you for being telepathic there.
If I could share my screen again, I have a pie chart that shows the budget for this year, and it's a pretty good snapshot. I don't think we're special in this at all. I think every school is probably spending fairly similar, but the large blue chunk is what I call direct staff, which that's staff that directly helps students in the classroom or the social emotional learning. We've got, social workers and counselors, but those are staff that are working directly with students. And that's a big chunk of the pie. The other really big chunk of the pie that you'll see on the left-hand side there in sort of that green color, you'll have to excuse me if I got my color wrong. I'm like 70% colorblind, but I think it's fairly green. That green color is what I call our general funds shortfall. Now, what all of us had to do, and I'm only speaking now for the large school districts across Montana, we had a lot of students that didn't show up at school. And a lot of them, quite frankly, were kindergartners that sat out for a year because that's allowable under state law. And so a lot of kindergartners homeschooled. We had a lot of other kids that decided to homeschool last year. What that caused, though, is it caused a shortfall in our general fund, because our general fund is based on the previous year's enrollment. Now we expect that budget is going to rebound because those kids are coming back into school. So we expect our budget to rebound. But this year we're short because of last year's enrollment. In the 2021 legislature, what the legislature said is that you could make up your shortfall with the federal COVID money. And so you'll see a big chunk of our COVID money this year went to shore up our general fund. You would ask yourself, why would you do that? Well, one of the reasons you do that is so you don't have to cut programming for kids. So a big chunk of that green section, even though it says general fund shortfall, is actually direct programming for kids. So we didn't have to cut any programs this year because we knew the kids were going to come back, which it appears they are coming back based on our enrollments. So we didn't want to have to cut programming or cut teachers. So we used a big chunk of our COVID money to make up that shortfall. And then you'll see some other interesting things there: technology, facility, professional development, which has become really important for our teachers, and supplies. Now, last year, our supply budget probably was a larger portion of the pie because we were buying a lot of supplies, but we ended up actually probably buying more than we needed. So we're still using some of the supplies from last year. But that gives you a sense of where we're at. I think going forward, what you'll see is that general fund shortfall would be much smaller in future years because our enrollment is rebounding, and then probably we're going to be looking at more direct things to help kids. But the part I worry about is that blue side of that chart. That largest piece is direct staff to help kids, and as was mentioned before, once the COVID money goes away, we will have to figure out another way to fund that staff if it's important for us to keep that.
Thank you. Barb, what about target range?
Absolutely. We spent quite a bit of money to have students participate in the summer camp option. And then, of course, like every school year, something breaks or something doesn't come together. So fortunately, the COVID money kind of helped sustain some of the things that we might, like our freezer went out. So we are able to purchase a new freezer and use COVID monies to cover some of the things that we would have paid out of general fund, if that makes sense. So we're on a definite smaller scale, but a large majority of our funding went so far to those summer camp options and providing extra tutoring for students, and then curriculum that we have not been able to purchase in a while. So we'll be able to do that. And then just be ready because something will happen.
Always be nimble.
Yeah. Be a bendy noodle is what we've referred to here. I think everyone's tired of hearing that by now, but it's true.
Doug, how about Hellgate?
You know, Adria, we're no different. What Rob showed, we actually experienced an enrollment drop last year as well, particularly with our younger children. We're experiencing now, a lot of them are coming back. Our enrollment is up from where it was last year. So that financially will be a plus for us. So we've supplemented that budgetary shortfall in the general fund with ESSER money, COVID monies, federal monies, to try to get us through the shortfall. And hopefully with that continued enrollment increase, we'll be fine taking care of that part of the general fund. As far as the district staff thing, and we know full well that our ability to maintain the extra staffing that we've brought on this year, and it is a kudo to the University of Montana and the education department. Most, if not every one of the young people that we hired this year is a graduate of your program, and they're fabulous young men and women, and we're just happy to have them on board. And we know that we're going to face difficulty in trying to keep those people beyond a year, maybe 2 years, simply from the fact the economic realities of what it costs. But right now, we felt it was so important. And historically, Hellgate Elementary is always below accreditation standards in terms of class size anyway. But we felt it was so important to hire that extra staff personnel to drop those class sizes down even more, especially given the situations that our kids are operating under right now. That it was a worthwhile expenditure, and I applaud our school board for buying into that and giving us the authority to hire those extra people to drop those class sizes down. Now, I'll write it out for a year or two, and then during that time, figure out how am I going to try to fund this in perpetuity so that I can keep these young people and keep these class sizes small for our kids, because it's just a tremendous opportunity for our kids to have a class where maybe it's one teacher for every 14 or 15 kids as opposed to 20 when you're in the kindergarten, first, second grade.
Thank you. And I'm so delighted that you've been able to hire some of our graduates. We are very grateful for the partnerships that we have with all three of the districts represented here today. So thank you very much. So we have another question here from Carissa Trujillo. What all have you been doing that you would regard as creative to support teachers through all of this?
I don't necessarily think this is creative, but it definitely has helped us retain our teachers. So a big part of recruitment in my mind is retention. Obviously, you know, the teaching profession is not an easy profession. There's some stress involved, and it's time consuming. It's one of the hardest jobs that you'll ever love. I mean, it is a wonderful profession, but we know for sure that we lose a lot of teachers in those first 5 years. So I don't necessarily think this is creative, because a lot of other districts have done this, although I do appreciate our program. We have a mentoring program that was funded through a grant through the National Teachers Union. And the whole notion of the program is to really help teachers retain in the profession. And so we know the importance of those first few years in our school district, and helping our teachers understand how our district works, helping them in the classroom, which is why the program is so effective. It's job embedded professional development for our new staff. We used a little bit of ESSER money this year to bolster that program, because we had more new staff this year than we've ever had, partially because of more added positions, partially because of teacher turnover, those that were retiring. But I would tell you that one program in itself has done wonders to retain people in the profession, because it's one of those professions where there can be a high burnout rate if there's not support. And so I think in the long run, we'll see benefits from that. And I constantly hear from our new staff how appreciative they are of that program. And some of them are teachers that have taught in other districts and are moving to Missoula, but just having that induction program so they kind of understand how our district works has been really helpful in retaining staff.
And Adrea, if I could just jump in here on that, both Target Range and MCPS have wonderful mentoring programs, just as Hellgate Elementary has. We actually got into the mentoring thing before the state mandated that schools had to get into the mentoring thing. And it has been just a fabulous addition to what we've been able to do, not only for our young people, but also for our veteran master teachers that serve as mentors, and the ability to reflect on professional practice, the ability to dialogue with someone about what does it mean to be a professional educator, and to put those theories into practice, and then to have opportunities to reflect on that has just been invaluable for us. And so we always say in our district, there are a couple sacred cows from a budget standpoint that we have. The mentoring program is one of those. It is something that's right at the top of the list every year in terms of funding priorities, that it is maintained, and it is a robust program. And we're so fortunate here at Hellgate Elementary. One of the professors that you use, I believe in an adjunct situation, Dr. Molly Blakely, who's our assistant superintendent here, is also our mentoring director and mentoring coordinator. And she just does a fabulous job in leading that program, as well as dealing with very robust instructional methodology instruction for our young people, our curriculum support that we have. And again, I've been here 22 years, and it's always been the idea when you talk about innovative things and creative things to make people feel valued or feel that they want to work here. People like working at Hellgate Elementary. Our people don't leave very often. It's a wonderful place to work. It's very supportive. Our facilities are wonderful. The equipment and materials that we have for our teachers, they're not at a loss, I don't think, for anything. And again, it's in large part not because I'm here, but because of the community family atmosphere that exists at Hellgate Elementary, where we're all in this together to try to create the the best possible educational environment for kids. And to do that, we try to create the best educational working environment for our staff, whether it be certified or classified. And I think that collectively, we've done a very good job of that over the years.
Thank you, Doug. Barb, what about you? It sounds like the summer camps.
Yeah, that was definitely helpful. And, you know, one of the things about working at Target Range is that I pride myself on creating an environment where people want to come to work. And so I liken my students to being the teachers and staff. So if they're struggling, I need to be there for them. So I spent a lot of time, and that's where my role as a principal is just a little bit different, but I spent a lot of time checking in on people and making sure they're okay and honoring the fact that they might not be okay and what can we do to help. And unfortunately, you know, we don't have substitute teachers, so they can't necessarily take a day and do something where they just to get their mind in the right place. So we have to really support within. So we also put a lot of onus on our teacher leaders, because we have a number of teachers that want that next step and want to not leave the classroom, but want to be responsible for something. And so we made sure that they had that opportunity, whether they served on a committee with our COVID task force or they participated with our PTO group or something like that, gave them that opportunity. One, it takes some pressure off me, because then I'm not going to 75 meetings, I'm only going to 65. But I also really getting their fires going, right? And we also participated in some learning coaching through a company called Better Lesson. But even I had a leadership coach last year, and where I've been in my role for a really long time, it was amazing to talk to somebody that she was on the East Coast. She's a college professor as well, and she's an administrator and all these things. And just to have someone to talk to that wasn't next door, so I could kind of vent a little bit, but also be receiving that feedback of, oh, that sounds like a great idea, but maybe you should try this, you know, and just having that support in another way other than just through my district. We are very small, like I've said before, and everybody knows everybody's business here. And so we have to really protect one another in order to keep it professional, as well as on the right track, and make sure that people want to come to work. And like Doug said, we don't lose teachers either. I haven't lost anyone to another district in a really long time. So I pride myself on that. And I think it's about taking care of those people and making sure that they're okay.
Well said, Barb. Thank you. So Ray and Susie Risho ask, my 7th grade granddaughter doesn't want to go to school now after spending last year at home. What could happen for her to continue her education?
Well, as far as Hellgate Elementary is concerned, we do have the distance learning option for her. If she wanted to continue her education that way, we have 2 certified teachers that are working through there in that program. And it's almost like each individual teacher is like a one-room schoolhouse in terms of how they're dealing with their kids on a one-to-one basis. And so we think we have that opportunity. It's a viable educational opportunity based off our curriculums that we have in place at our school. And if that would be a program that the child would be interested in, we're hoping to continue that until such time as a child feels that they want to make the transition back to in-person learning. I don't think that the distance learning option is something that's going to go away just because possibly COVID might go away. I think it's an opportunity for certain families and certain children to take advantage of. And we just want to make sure that it is as meaningful as it possibly can be so that our kids can get a quality educational experience. The law that was passed in the last legislative session allowing homeschool and distance learning off-campus students to participate in extracurricular activities, I think is a huge plus. To allow those kids that may feel more comfortable in a smaller environment, in a virtual environment, while at the same time being able to come on campus and participate in the extracurricular activities, whether it be in the middle school or in Rob's case, middle school and high school, much more robust there. But I think that could work for a child like that.
Thank you. Barb, Rob, anything to add? Okay, thanks so much. So we have a question from Grace Decker, who is on the Missoula County Public Schools Board of Trustees. She says, thank you all for the information about the strategies you're using to keep kids and staff safe at school. I'd like to hear more about how you will learn what kids need as they enter school. How will they be assessed academically and socially? Specifically, how will you help kids who are returning to the in-person setting after a long time away, or kindergartners who missed out on preschool or other early learning settings?
You want to take that one, Rob, or you want me to start on that?
No, go ahead, Doug.
Well, again, and that's a valuable question. I mean, because we do have children who have deferred, for lack of a better term, their entrance into the public school setting, and parents who have deferred that. And so our responsibility is not only to try to find it, and we do have a series of assessments that we can use academically to try to gauge where children are, whether they be kindergarten children, third grade, fifth grade, what have you, at least from an academic standpoint. And then also moving into assessments in terms of where they at socially and emotionally. And those child find activities have taken on they've always been important, but even more important right now in trying to gauge how do we appropriately place the child into the public school setting so that they can feel success and comfort when they first get to us. And for some of our kids, it's a huge adjustment. It's not an easy transition for them, especially, for example, at Rob's school, his school district, where there's well over 8,000 students in that school. In our school district, there's over 1,500 students in our school district. When a child comes into us in kindergarten and they come into the building and there's 10 sections of kindergarten and there's 10 sections of first grade, for heaven's sakes, they look at that and it can be somewhat overwhelming, not only for the child, but for the parent. So it is our responsibility to do whatever we have to do from an assessment standpoint, formal as well as informal, as well as dialoguing with the parent to get the parent's perception on what are the strengths of their child, what are the concerns they have for their child, and try to develop a program to take all that into account so that child can be successful. I wish it was just as easy to say, well, they're all widgets and we can just place them here and place them there. But a human being is not a widget. And so we have to incorporate a number of different factors in trying to appropriately devise a plan, which may not be consistent across all areas for all kids and more individualized so that child can feel success.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Doug.
the only thing I would add is, as I mentioned earlier, it's our program is really designed to target things that we need to do school-wide and also target some things we have to do for individual students. And every school in our district has that support team that gets together at least once a week and talks about universals. What can we do school-wide versus talks about specific students? What do we need to do to help this individual student? And so that was in place long before COVID, though, that intervention support team. And what I really appreciate about it is there are a lot of things we can do at the school-wide level to impact all kids, which we really need to do now with all of us coming out of COVID and coming out of the pandemic. We need some of those school-wide universals. The only other thing I'd mention that is probably really specific, but it's important to note, you can do some creative stuff with your calendar as well. And this year we started off our school year with kindergarten, sixth grade, and ninth grade only. But at the same time, we also, especially at middle school, we welcome back some of the kids that had been sitting out for a year. So if I was a fifth grader and I chose Online Academy last year, and now I'm in sixth grade, I can go in on that day and just be a sixth grader with the other sixth graders. And so it allowed all of our staff to focus on the sixth graders for that day. We also welcomed in some kids that had sat out sixth grade. So if I was a sixth grader last year and I'm coming into middle school for the very first time, I was also welcomed on that first day in a smaller environment with less kids. So just some kind of real specific things you can do to ease that transition. I think all of our teachers are real cognizant of the needs coming out of that transition. I know that they're focused on where kids are at. And quite honestly, all of us are in somewhat of a transition. We had a totally different schedule last year in terms of a intensive block schedule at middle school and high school, and we're coming out of that now. So even for our own students that were in school last year, there's been some big transitions this year, and we recognize that. I think Grace is well aware. There's the incoming kindergarten countywide assessment that is really great. We get some great data from that. It kind of tells us where kindergartners are coming in, and with a lot more kindergarten teachers participating in that pilot program right now. So there's a couple of things I think we do well, and we can always do more.
Barb, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd like to add is, when it comes to school-wide and assessments, we're really good at those things that are very black and white. But one of the things that we kind of forgot about because of COVID was the relationship building and how important that is at the start of a school year. And so by bringing kids back, for example, our kindergarten started today because this last week, our kindergarten teachers spent a ton of time with each family, showing them around the building, getting them acclimated to the classroom and things, which like Rob said, we were creative with our calendar so we could get those families in here. And so relationships and communication, oftentimes, like Doug said, kids aren't widgets. And so it might take a village to kind of figure out what they need. So by bringing some of those traditional things back that we love so much that we got away from with COVID, helps us tremendously. So we just have to remember not to get rid of those and place value in those as well.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if we might expand here. Jeremy Flesh asks, well, he begins his question with a statement saying there's significant research indicating that middle and high school students perform better when the start time of the school day is later than 8:30 a.m. So in the interest of building back better after COVID, were you able to alter the start time of the school to recognize the benefits of starting the school day?
Yeah, I think we did a good job with high school. We came out of this and reworked our schedule for high school. The only problem is because we use the same bus contractor for all three levels that we had to jockey with the middle school time. So our middle school is actually starting about 15 minutes earlier than they used to start, which is probably not ideal. What I committed to and what we found out last spring is that we have a great bus contractor that's willing to work with us in beach transportation. And what we really need to do is take a deep dive in all of our bus routes and kind of figure out which ones are full, which ones are not full, which ones we can combine. And we're committed to doing that this year in the hopes of getting a better start time for middle school. That's the only one area where I'm still a little struggling this year with our middle school start time. Our high school start time is later, which is really healthy, but at the same time, it also puts kids out later in the day. I'm the father of a teenager, and I think what she would say is I'd rather start late and end early, which is not possible. But they are starting later, but they're also ending later. And so that has created some other issues on the other end. For example, kids that have to go to work right after school or typically work right after school, now they've got a shorter window to get to their job. So you got to be considerate of that. The last thing I'll just mention that was a benefit coming out of COVID is we readjusted our elementary times. So in previous years, we'd had the K1, 2 kids and the third grade kids out at a half hour earlier than the other kids. Now, what we tried to do is get a common release time. And I think that's a benefit to families because if you have siblings at the same school and one sibling gets out a half hour before the other one, it can be tough to work around that. So we worked really hard with our bus company. And again, Beach has done a great job in supporting us on this, but to try to get a common release time for elementary, that's something we've never had before. And the last thing I'll say that is loosely tied to all this is the high school schedules. This is the very first year probably, and I'm going to say this literally in the last 40 years, that all three high schools have been on the same schedule. And that was definitely a positive that came out of COVID because we realized that we needed to be a lot more flexible and kids needed to be able to access classes from perhaps another school or access an online class. So now all of our high schools are on the same schedule in terms of each period, which periods they have each day. And our online academy is also on the same schedule so that if a kid wanted to do online academy, but wanted to take an elective class at their high school, they could do so. So there are some really creative things we learned from COVID, and we tried to keep as many of those as we could going into this school year.
Thanks for that. Dave Peppinger asks, thank you all for presenting and speaking, as well as all you do for the children of Missoula. What are some of the changes each of you have made at the schools to help mitigate COVID for teachers and students, specific to the buildings themselves, the physical plant themselves, such as air filtration, teaching outside, Zoom, those kinds of things? Barb, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, we actually had ionization units put in our air filtration system. We redid our HVAC system just most recently within the last 5 years. So we were definitely in a good space with that. And then we added another piece and part so that that airflow could happen, the intake could happen more quickly. And then last year we rented large tents that are often used for like a wedding. For teachers to teach outside and for classes to be outside. And ironically, they didn't really want to use them that much. They just wanted to be outside. So we didn't rent the tents this year, and we just bought picnic tables instead. And so a lot of classes will go out there and have their classes or their lunches out there. The one thing that we do run into that we did last year is supervision. You know, ideally, we'd love to send all kids outside to eat and play, but you have to have proper supervision, and we just don't always have the staffing for that. And we are also trying to make sure that teachers get a lunch. Last year they ate with their students and were paid accordingly, but I think if we were to tell them that this year, as much as they love their kids, they're tired, and that 30 minutes to use the restroom and get a little bite to eat is sacred to them. So we're back using our lunchroom, and we take kids out as much as we possibly can, but it just can't happen safely all the time. And then we do have a lot of like other mitigation measures in terms of like screens and different things that get put up when students might be snacking and taking masks off. They wear their face covering in the building at all times. They go outside for masking breaks. And pretty much all of that. Hand sanitizer is hugely popular and continues to be very popular. But all of those measures that we saw last year are still in place. And some of them I don't think we'll ever get away from, like the hand sanitizer, especially if you have smaller children in your building. And we even so much as went and sanitized the playground equipment last year after every recess. And whereas we don't do that as much this time because of what we've learned about surfaces, we still are doing that a little because we thought, after all these years, why weren't we doing that? Because of all the children and the germs. So some of those things we were creative with that have stuck, but gosh, if we could be outside all the time, that would be great, but it's just not feasible.
Thanks, Barb. Doug?
Yeah, Dave, great question. Obviously here at Hellgate Elementary, I mentioned earlier about our mitigation strategies, obviously the hand sanitizing, the deep cleaning as best we possibly can with our custodial staff. And when I say that, I don't want anybody to get the misperception that our custodial staff hasn't been deep cleaning. They're fabulous. And they've been doing wonderful work for the 2 decades that I've been here. They've just been a great department here at our school. We do have, we try to keep our kids in pods, even though we have more opportunity this year for our kids to move around than they did last year. That movement is still in smaller units as we go through the course of the school day. Respiratory etiquette is always a big one for our kids to understand. We are in the process of installing HEPA filters in every classroom. We just completed our K1 building, and now we're working on our 2-3 building. We're going to get that set up, and we'll just go through the entire district doing that. We do have masking going on in our district, face coverings. It is mandatory at Hellgate Elementary, though we have opportunities during the course of the day for kids to get out of those, whether they be mask breaks during the day, whether it be in PE, whether they be in lunch opportunities. And we do have, and fortunately, we're able to have the coverage is that we can get our kids outside for lunch as much as we possibly can. Music, our facilities are large enough that we can spread our kids out and keep the social distancing that we need, that the kids would be able to get those masks off for their music classes, and to go back to our regular orchestra, choir, band programs. As Rob mentioned earlier, our ancillary programs that were put on hold last year, we're able to get back into doing some of those things. So I think we're trying to get back to normal as much as we possibly can, while at the same time keeping those mitigation strategies in place. And one of the simplest things we try to do in the morning is just make sure staff remembers, open the window, get some fresh air. Fortunately, we did have some wind come through that blew the smoke out of the valley over the weekend, which was great, so that we could get our kids outside and get some fresh air into those classrooms. And so we try to do some simple things like that, combined with, as Barb said, some of the mitigation strategies that we're using. They're never going to go away again, and that's a good thing. And we can make sure that that works for us. We invested tens of thousands of dollars over the course of the summer, putting sinks into classrooms that didn't have sinks in them, and we still have some classrooms that we need to retrofit. But we're in that process and in that progress of making the facilities as safe as we possibly can make them from a virus standpoint. So that's what we're doing, Adrea.
Thank you, Doug. Rob, is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't have a lot to add. Much of the same that Doug and Barb described. The only thing I would add, because of the generosity of the taxpayers in Missoula County, we are able to actually do a lot of renovations in most all of our buildings and improve that learning environment for a lot of kids in terms of heating and ventilation. As Barb mentioned, we also added the ionizers in all of our units, which was a big undertaking last fall, but it was an important piece of mitigation. And then the thing that we did last year is we just bought a whole ton of filters with our money, and we kept buying filters every chance we got, because we knew that changing filters as often as possible would help with the circulation and mitigation. And so we have a stockpile of air filters, and we'll continue to purchase those as much as we can. And reported by our facilities folks that we're probably replacing those a lot more often than we ever had in the past.
Great, thank you. Anna Kiley asks, thank you for all your outstanding work to support students and teachers. I was hoping for some information regarding gifted programming and whether Hellgate Elementary anticipates being able to offer services for gifted learners this school year.
Yes, we think we're going to be able to do it. Obviously on our middle school level, because of the different types of curricular programs we offer in mathematics and language arts, we try to take advantage of it right there. As far as differentiating the instruction and identifying gifted and talented children that we have, we do our testing, and we do try to identify those kids, and we try to make sure that we have opportunities, again, through our curriculum development and our instructional methodology. We don't have pull-out programs per se at Hellgate Elementary for our gifted kids, but we do try to make sure that we offer opportunities for those kids to be challenged, to take advantage. And that's just not with add-on work, but actually to be challenged in the areas that they are gifted. Could we do a better job? Yes, we could. But we are working through that. And again, I think that Dr. Blakely, in her instructional coaching and curriculum development standpoint, is doing a wonderful job with teachers trying to put in place a programming to take advantage of that.
Thank you. Rob and Barb, do you want to address gifted and MCPS in that target range?
Yeah, Doug answered it perfectly. I would reiterate everything he said. I think we can always do better. We're constantly trying to figure out how to make that program better, but it's not perfect. And I would say that in the state of Montana, with the lack of resources towards that program in the state, we're much different than a lot of other states that have a dedicated funding stream for that program. We just don't have that in Montana, and would advocate for that in the future for sure. But we do the best with what we have.
Thank you. So John Pillsworth asks, how has your interaction changed with the local health department?
I think it's important to note that we have a really strong relationship, and I think all of us would say that. But It's always been a real strong relationship. I think it even became more so last year. But I still feel pretty confident in the relationship we have with them. I feel very comfortable calling and asking questions, getting help when needed. I think probably the biggest thing that changed, and it has nothing to do with the health department, but probably everything to do with the state that we're in right now. But it's just a matter of how we contact trace. That's changed a little bit from last year, primarily because of some things that happened at the state legislature. But contact tracing is still a really important mitigation strategy. We're still doing that. But what's a little bit different than last year is that we can't, the health department can't necessarily require people to stay home based on vaccination status or not. So it's become a little bit of an unknown in terms of how that will happen or how that will work. But I would say that we still have lots of support from the health department. Unfortunately, right now, because the cases are so high, they're unable to keep up with the contact tracing, and they would tell you that themselves. And that's not a fault of theirs. It's just the fact that they need to hire more staff, just like we all do. We're doing the best we can to keep up with our own contact tracing, but we also know that as cases rise, we'll get behind in that as well. We issue a stay-at-home request, which the vast majority of our families will follow that request when we tell them that they're a close contact. But the actual order has to come from the health department, but that might not happen for several days after. So there's a lot of cooperation that needs to go on between us and the health department and between us and our families when working through this.
And Adria, I just reiterate what Rob said. Our relationship with the Missoula City County Health Department is wonderful. They've just been a wonderful partner for Hellgate Elementary in terms of questions that we need answered, in terms of helping us work through the COVID situation. Our school nurse, Braden Byrne, does a wonderful job in networking with the health department on the contact tracing and trying to make sure that our kids are out of school the least amount of time that they have to be out of school in order to make sure that they're safe and the rest of our kids and our staff members are safe. Obviously, things have changed because of the last legislative session, but we're working through that. But I just couldn't say enough positive things about the health department. They've just been a wonderful partner.
Thank you both.
I will agree with that. And I just wanted to add, we are one of the districts that unfortunately does not have a school nurse. And so we are thankful for those at Hellgate Elementary and MCPS as well, because like both gentlemen said, sometimes the health department is a little harder to get a hold of. So having those other resources available to just bounce ideas off of, or just say, hey, I have this particular situation. Braden's helped us out a number of times, and the folks at MCPS, just to be supportive of one another. So the county health department has done their best. They've held Zooms for us, and they've done all sorts of things to keep us in the know. At the end of the day, we're not infectious disease people. We don't know all these things. So it's really helpful that they have extended themselves, but I'm also thankful for the neighboring districts that are larger and can help us navigate this.
Thank you. So we have another question. People are curious about whether there were any staff or teachers who were leery of going back to in-person teaching, and if so, what are districts doing to work with teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a reality. We do have some staff members that are concerned, and we try to validate those concerns. They're certainly well-founded. But what we've tried to do, obviously, in all of our mitigation strategies and all of our support things that we put in place, is try to make sure that they're as comfortable as they possibly can. And the bottom line is, regardless of the hesitancy or not, I think the people who work in all three districts that are represented here today, those professional educators are just that. They're professional educators. They're committed to working with kids and trying to provide the best opportunity to maximize the academic achievement of children. And they are willing to put themselves, first responders are putting themselves out on the line to make sure that our kids have a quality educational experience. And our responsibility, at least mine, I feel as a superintendent, is try to make sure that I do whatever I have to do to put in place strategies that will help them feel comfortable and help them feel secure. Can I take away entirely their angst, I can't. But if I can at least help alleviate some of that by things we're doing as a district, I think that's well-founded and it's money well spent.
Thank you, Doug. Would others like to respond? All right.
That was a great response. I ditto Doug's commitment to his educators. I think, we're all a little anxious right now. I often tell our staff, the start of the school year is always anxious in a normal school year. We all get a little bit of butterflies in our stomach. I think this is my 29th one, and I still had butterflies on the first day. So the anxiousness is always there. This is just heightened because of the situation that we're all in. Being sensitive and responsive to that. We still have some educators working in the online academy. So that was an option for a few of our educators, but just being understanding of that. I can tell you that the happiest place for teachers is in the classroom with kids. And we saw that last year. We saw that this fall. I mean, once the school year gets started and gets rolling, that's really their happiest place, is to be there with kids. And for any educator, that's a critical piece.
Are there any questions that you anticipated that have not been asked yet?
I don't have any. Adrea, I would just like to thank the City Club for the opportunity. As Rob and Barb have said, we don't often get the opportunity to share what we're doing in our schools. We're very proud of our schools, each and every one of us. We have things we think we do wonderfully well. We have things we think we could do better on, but on balance, when you look at the educational opportunities that are provided Missoula's children, I think Missoula is blessed to have the school districts and the people that they have working in the school districts. And again, it isn't because I'm there. I'm just a cog in the wheel, so to speak, but I'm just so thankful to be able to work in Missoula and to work with the professionals that I get to work with, and knowing what they do for Missoula's kids. It's truly a miracle, and it's just a joy to be a part of.
Well said. I'd also like to thank City Club and for inviting this conversation. And I'd also like to thank the three of you on the panel for really demonstrating and embodying what banding together can look like. And how we look out for one another, how we help each other through this. So you're all models for that. And I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing to serve our community and to serve the children who live here.
Thank you.
So with that, I think Julie.
Thank you all, Adrea, Barb, Doug, and Rob, for this extremely timely experience regarding education in today's current environment. And thank you to all of you on our audience who were here today. Again, thank you to our sponsors, especially the University of Montana, First Security Bank, and Blackfoot Communications. Please join us on October 11th for our next forum. Check out our website or Facebook page later this week for more information. Thanks to all. Have a great week.